Pixar's lovable collection of living toys are seemingly always facing some sort of existential crisis and just fear of outgrowing their usefulness, but their position as bankable movie stars appears secure. Really an impressive 31 years after the first Toy Story movie, the gang is back together for another entertaining adventure as they face their biggest challenge yet, and that is the dreaded tech takeover. So does Toy Story 5 live up to the reputation of one of the most loved and highly rated animated series really of all time? Or are the toys finally reaching the end of their life cycle? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So I saw this movie with my two 11-year-old twin boys, and I will say right from the start that all three of us enjoyed it quite a bit, even if I don't think it's quite lives up to the standard of the previous films. But for the most part, this is a good film. I think the iconic toys haven't lost any of their charm, and with plenty of humor and heart, I think Toy Story 5 is a worthy entry in the beloved series, even if its very commendable message about tech feels aimed more at parents than younger viewers. Now, after the pretty disastrous spin-off movie Lightyear back in 2022, I think Pixar wisely returns Toy Story back to its roots, but it actually doesn't rely too heavily on nostalgia. In fact, the original band of toys, such as Rex or Slinky Dog or Mr. Potato Head, or even last film's breakout star Forky, are essentially just cameos, and even Woody and Buzz Lightyear mostly take a backseat in a supporting role. Instead, Toy Story 5 is primarily Jesse's story. I think it is a bit disappointing not to see more of the fan favorites, but I think narrowing the story in on a singular character and just her specific journey makes the film feel more personal. I think Toy Story 5 is not the most fun entry in the series, but I do think it is among the most heartfelt and meaningful. Toy Story 5 may be slightly more dramatic and serious, at least at times, but it still got plenty of quirky hijinks and humor. A repeated subplot featuring an army of Buzz Lightyears kind of reminded me of Scrat from the Ice Age movies as a series of interludes responsible for the film's best and funniest moments. There are also several scenes that adopt a sort of storybook-esque visual aesthetic as the children's play comes to life, which I totally loved. I think these sequences are just a total delight, and I do think kind of beautifully encapsulate just the joy and magic of a child's imagination. I think the film is at its best when kind of positively celebrating just imaginative play kind of in that way, rather than just sort of cautioning against the negative dangers of screen time. While previous Toy Story films largely explores kind of what happens to a toy when their kid grows up, Toy Story 5 explores what happens to toys and just imaginative play when all kids grow up at a faster pace due to the overindulgence in technology and screen time. The result is a darker, almost apocalyptic tone at times. I don't think it's anything that younger viewers won't be able to handle, and it's arguably never even as intense as Sid's room was in the original film, but it does seem to have a slightly more kind of weighty or oppressive vibe to it. I'll say too, it's been a while since I've seen the other Toy Story films, so I don't recall if the previous films included many or any kind of boundary-pushing gags or innuendos, but there are a few more in Toy Story 5 than I expected. To be clear, it's far from overbearing. I think the film overall is very wholesome, but I think the inclusion of kind of any such humor reflects just a general question I had kind of throughout this film, and that is, who is this film for? And what I mean by that is that films like Masters of the Universe or Barbie, kind of based on real-world toys, were, in my opinion, to their detriment, not really about inspiring the same sense of wonder that made kids originally fall in love with those toys in the first place, but instead about lecturing their now grown-up audience on how to navigate sort of their relationship with these seemingly problematic toys. Now, Toy Story 5 is not necessarily that exactly, but it does kind of feel like a case of speaking at kids rather than with them. For example, I was 8 years old when I saw the first Toy Story film in theaters in 1995, and I'm now a parent with 11-year-old sons of my own, but in some ways, Toy Story 5 still feels like it's aiming at me rather than my kids. And in an interview kind of before the release of this film, director Andrew Stanton made a comment saying, "Technology has changed everybody's lives, but we're asking what that means for us and to our kids. And I think that is like an important and agreeable message, but like the phrasing of that quote is interesting to me. I think unlike a character like Riley in the Inside Out movies, to me, Toy Story 5 never really feels like 8-year-old Bonnie's story, but instead like a parent's perspective on Bonnie's story. On like another note, and this is maybe just me speaking as a parent, but the film's message is clearly like a caution against tech and a celebration that nothing beats good old-fashioned imaginative play. Still, I wonder if there is at least like a slight danger in introducing a solution to a problem that may not yet exist, kind of like how many Christmas movies like encouraging kids to believe in Santa Claus often serve to like introduce kids to the realization that many people don't believe in Santa Claus. Where like in Toy Story 5, several sort of tech obsessed kids mock Bonnie for still playing with toys, kind of sending her rude messages in the group chat with pictures and like emojis of crying babies, and this does lead her to feel like self-conscious about her toys. And the film ultimately like rejects these opinions and promotes old school play as awesome and superior. But I think kind of along the way, as young viewers sort of vicariously share in Bonnie's bullying, it may kind of unintentionally introduce them to the idea that play is something silly just for little children and is an activity that like no other kids are doing these days. Again, this is not like a major concern or issue, but it's something that I thought of while watching with my own kids. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, for language, there are no like actual spoken profanities, although there are several like innuendos and like double entendres, mostly from the newly introduced character Smarty Pants, who is like a potty training device. For example, like on the verge of a fight, a character says that Smarty Pants is going to wipe your before being interrupted from finishing that word. Also, during like one of those sequences of sort of child's play, Smarty Pants is given like an aristocratic persona and a name that begins with Shat, and he repeatedly kind of corrects other characters' mispronunciations to emphasize that part. Then you just also have him saying things like flush me, and other characters that kind of use frequent language like darn and geez, or saying things like cheese and crackers or jumping Jehoshaphat. For violence, really nothing here, at least nothing that I would consider concerning or problematic. For sexuality, nothing really here either, although you do have sort of in pretty minor ways, you have male characters who are seemingly given like female roles or outfits during like the sequences of the child's play, which I think, considering that all the children in the film are girls, is probably unsurprising and likely, I think, harmless rather than being sort of ideologically driven. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface of this, I think had psychologist Jonathan Haidt been listed in the film's credits as a writer, it would not have been a surprise to me, because I think in many ways Toy Story 5 is almost like an adaptation of the timely messages of his book, The Anxious Generation, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. And the film goes beyond just declaring like the evils of technology and the development of children, and instead showcases some of like the concerning consequences of it, such as damaged self-esteem or FOMO-inspired anxiety, and there's like the difficulty of like building meaningful relationships when our eyes are constantly glued to a screen. Now, Toy Story 5 does have a lot of, I think, nuance and doesn't take like a wholly negative position on technology. Even the film's so-called like villain, a tablet named Lilypad, is ultimately redeemed, and really all of the other sort of newly introduced characters are actually like previous generations of tech, such as like a potty training device or a functional toy camera or a GPS. So I think the film's message is less of like a shake your fist at the cloud sort of recollection of a pre-technological like golden age, and more an acceptance that like the world is changing and we all need to be aware and like intentional about how we adapt with it. It's also notable and like convicting as a parent that many scenes feature like adult characters in the background being on like a laptop or other device, and just suggest that like the real problem is not just like the existence of technology, but sort of our over dependence on it and the way in which we allow it just to like take over our lives, and just the example we set as adults. And I think the series sort of at large has always been about just sort of the importance of childhood and the need to protect the innocence for as long as possible. And obviously I think there is a important difference between like being childish and being like a child. The Bible challenges Christians to put away childish things, but Jesus also said Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Obviously, we all need to grow up in some ways at some point, but clearly Christ affirmed that there is something special and like essential about the worldview of a child. And I think Toy Story 5 is like a timely reminder of how these like formative periods of life can shape us like even into adulthood, and just the need to like guard ourselves against forces such as excessive screen time that may force children to grow up too fast. So in the end, I think there's a lot to appreciate about Toy Story 5. The animation is beautiful. I think the characters are charming, and the message is timely. I think after the failure of Lightyear, Pixar easily could have like overly course corrected into a very cheap play for nostalgia, but instead the film clearly attempts to tell like a meaningful story, not just to put another Toy Story movie into theaters. Even so, while it may not be true that the age of toys is over, as one character declares in the film, I think the days of Toy Story movies may be coming to an end, because even like the voice acting feels a bit tired at times in a series that feels like it may have said all it has to say with these characters. That is, until this film makes $1 billion at the box office and Toy Story 6 sees the characters as overpriced merchandise in a collectible shop as part of the toys are for adults trend. But whether or not this is the end, I think it is another solid movie. It may not be among the best in the series, but if Toy Story 5 can inspire even a little bit more childlike imagination in our age of obsessive screen usage, then I think it is a story worth telling. But hey, I would love to hear what you think if you go see this movie on your own, or maybe you take your kids. Don't be shy, jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation on it. If you haven't done so too, I encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. We'd love to have you guys be a part of that. Most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.